Wait. Before we start, just want to make sure we're clear here. While this podcast talks about sobriety, mental health, and addiction, it is not meant to replace professional medical advice. Welcome to Sisters in Sobriety.
I'm Kathleen.
And I'm Sonia.
And we're ex-sisters-in-law, brought together in marriage and bonded through our sobriety journey.
Join us as we talk sobriety, addiction, and everything in between. You're in for quite a ride. And our Substack is buzzing with amazing content, from creative mocktail recipes to insightful courses and reflective exercises. There is something for everyone. Don't miss out. It's a great way to add some extra joy and depth to your journey. Check it out. So we are thrilled to have a really special guest with us today, Derek Brown. And Derek is a renowned author, a NASM certified wellness coach, and the founder of Positive Damage, which is a company dedicated to promoting mindful drinking and creating inclusive spaces for everyone, whether they choose to drink alcohol or not.
Derek's journey from being one of America's top bartenders, owning the award-winning Columbia Room in Washington, D.C., to becoming a leading advocate for no and low alcohol cocktails is really, really inspiring. He has been recognized as a thought leader in the beverage industry, and his work has been featured in publications like Vogue and the Washington Post.
So today we'll dive into his personal story, explore the concept of mindful drinking, and learn how we can all foster a healthier relationship with alcohol. So we welcome Derek to the show. Derek, can you start off just by telling us a little bit about your journey from being a bartender to a mindful drinking advocate?
You know, alcohol had affected my life very early on. My father identifies as an alcoholic, and my foster sister died in a drunk driving accident when I was about 5 years old. So all of this kind of led to this relationship with alcohol where obviously I had already encountered a lot of pain from it. But when I started working in the industry, it also became a salve. It helped me, in a way, cover feelings and thoughts that I had that were difficult. And so through that, I just kept doing it. And it was part of the industry. It was part of the way that we bonded. It was part of the way that we connected with each other. It was part of the way that we celebrated at the end of the night. We relieved a stressful day. And so by the time I was bartending in my mid-20s, I was having drinks at the end of the night on a weekend in DC, which is where I bartended and I live. The bar shuts down around 3 a.m. We'd clean up, and 4 a.m. we'd start drinking if we hadn't already had a couple shots behind the bar. And so we drink till 8 o'clock in the morning. And it was sort of this vampiric lifestyle. So it's like all of these forces were coalescing. And by the time I was in my 30s and I owned my own bar, and I was racking up all of these great accolades for the work that I was doing as a bartender, as a bar owner. 2015, Imbibe named me as a Bartender of the Year. In 2017, Columbia Room got the Best American Cocktail Bar. By then, though, all these external facing awards were great, but internally I was a mess. And there was so much about my life that was just not, we'll say, it was less than optimal. My relationships, my health, my finances. And it was just because there was a lot of issues that I had not dealt with in my life, especially around mental health. And so it became a point where I had to change my relationship with alcohol. And so I ended up doing that. And as a result, I went to an outpatient program. I started doing therapy, using therapeutic drugs, learning more about health and wellness. And out of that, I realized I didn't identify as an alcoholic per se, although I certainly and absolutely had alcohol use disorder. What I realized is I could drink mindfully. And so after a year or two, and this is not something that I think is prescriptive for anyone but me, right? So I just want to clarify that for listeners. If you're like, okay, great, I've been a year off the sauce and it's time to start drinking again. Derek says it's cool. Derek did not say that at all. Derek said that about me, and that's it. And so I got to the point where I started studying about wellness. I got my certification as a wellness coach. I started studying positive psychology at UPenn, and I was in a much better place. And you know what? Instead of wanting to continue drinking, I just stopped drinking altogether because I just didn't need it anymore. It wasn't an important part of my life. And it was at the time that there was this exciting renaissance in no and low alcohol beverages. And that's where we find ourselves now. So I'll stop there and pause in my story.
So Derek, I know I've thought this throughout the years, and I know a lot of the listeners have, which is maybe I could just have one drink, right? And then I go through this like process of like, well, where would I be in like a month or 6 months? And I don't know, right? And so how did you decide to go from like sobriety to mindful drinking, and then you went back to sobriety again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't necessarily identify myself as somebody who is sober. I am sober in the sense that I don't drink, but I'm open to having a drink in the future. But I think that, my process of identification is I recognize that alcohol wasn't something that I needed because of the alcohol, right? I needed it because of some of my experiences, the mental health. In a sense, I was using it to suppress my feelings and thoughts. Later I'd be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so there is some correlation between that and drinking. And basically, because of my mental health issues, I drank as a type of medicine. And once I had addressed those issues, I didn't really feel that I had to drink. I didn't feel like I wanted to drink per se, So I think it really came down to that need. I did not need a drink, and so I had the option to have one if I wanted it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that, if I look back to my own journey, I was self-medicating severe anxiety and depression. And for me, even though those have resolved to a certain extent, I think it's only when I experience severe anxiety or a panic attack do I actually feel like maybe a drink would be good right now. So I get that.
I get it too.
Yeah.
I get it too. I medicated my ADHD with cocaine. So it was a stimulant, right? So that's what my medication was. So I wouldn't say that I need it in the same way that I used to either. So I really relate to that, Derek, as well.
Yeah.
Right. Again, this is my own experience. And there are statistics that there are a lot of people who have problems with drinking, stop drinking, and then are able to drink again. But I think that each person's recovery is unique to themselves. And so this is something I kind of just knew in my bones, that I could have a drink and it would not lead me into another drink, and so on. So yeah, the self-medicating was a huge part of it. And maybe this is like a weird way to say it, but when I needed alcohol, I needed it. In some ways, it was helpful to me, and may have even for a brief time kept me alive. Yeah. But it was ultimately it was a tool that just it's not the best tool, right? And so eventually it led to even greater problems. And so really, when I say that I got help and therapy and all this, I found better coping mechanisms is what it really came down to, through things like exercise and diet and mindfulness and therapy and positive psychology and all of that stuff, reaching out to community, deepening my relationships. All of those led me to a place where I felt much better about my mental health. And I no longer needed a drink. And I no longer worried that one drink would lead to a second and a third and so on.
And so what do you think one of the biggest challenges was for you personally in this journey to mindful drinking? Was it your career? Was it socializing? Was it relationships? What was the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge along the way is that I had made an entire career. I had built an entire life around alcohol. And in many ways, like I mentioned earlier, my whole life has been determined by alcohol from the day I was born. And so when it came to the point where I had to give up alcohol and address other things, it was very scary. It was in many ways like losing a friend or a parent. Like it was losing somebody who had been there for me in so many situations. And so that part of it was scary. Like, what do you do when you go out? What do you do when you're in a social situation? What do you do when you're stressed? What do you do when you want to entertain yourself? All these questions popped up. But most importantly is when I'm having these thoughts and feelings, what do I do? And really, like I said, I just found better coping mechanisms. I felt like I was able to address these issues that I had with mental health, and all of a sudden a new world opened to me, which is not all of a sudden magical and perfect, right? I often caution people, I'm sure you all understand this very well, but if you stop drinking or you stop doing drugs, if you stop using substances, it doesn't all of a sudden make everything perfect. In fact, many of the problems you have exist, and now you just have to face them. One of my favorite psychologists who talks about is a guy named Stephen C. Hayes, who founded acceptance and commitment therapy, an incredible person, a renowned psychologist, and somebody who himself went through panic disorder and had to deal with it, who has lived experience with mental health issues. He talks about facing the dinosaur, right? Like in his dream, he would always have these dinosaurs chasing after him as a child. And at some point, he turned around and faced the dinosaur. And that he woke up and he found a new way to address that fear. And so I guess that's what I'm saying, is that in many ways, like when you give up drinking, it brings you face to face with yourself and your problems. But that's a wonderful place to be, because now you can really face them, address them, and make changes that you need to be a better person, to live a healthier life.
So Derek, I use acceptance and commitment therapy in my practice. It's my primary modality with individuals. Yeah, so I love Stephen Hayes. So good. But I wanted to ask you about mindfulness, because mindfulness is very much incorporated into ACT. And when I work with clients, we definitely integrate mindfulness. I don't always call it mindfulness, but I want to ask you about mindful drinking and what that was like. What does that mean for you, mindful drinking?
Sure. Well, the first thing is that in this case, mindful might be more closer to the idea of mind the gap, right? To be aware of something. And it doesn't always mean in the present moment, because sometimes it means being aware of your history with drinking as well. So whereas mindfulness is usually an awareness within the present moment, mindful drinking might be close to that and incorporate aspects of that. But in general, my definition of it is that it is aligning the way that you drink or don't drink alcohol in relationship to your goals, health or otherwise. Right? So, whereas I think there's a lot of responsibility messaging that tells you, oh, you shouldn't drink because you're going to do, this is going to happen to you. You're going to get liver disease. You're going to get cancer. You're going to end up addicted. You're going to crash your car. All of these potentialities that are real aspects of alcohol use, and especially if you're drinking often and a lot. But that kind of fear tactics, I think doesn't really work. So mindful drinking is saying, let's tie it to intrinsic goals that you have, right? So these goals might be, I want to spend more time with my family, or I want to get my degree, or I want to be a skateboarding champion, which is something I wanted at some point in my life. So it could be any of these goals, and it can be any of your values, the things that you believe about yourself and you believe are important. That's where you want to tie your relationship to alcohol with. If it doesn't fit, then it's important to change your relationship to alcohol to match your goals. And sometimes it can be very immediate goals. Sometimes it's just, I have a meeting the next day, and I don't want to be hungover for it. I don't want to have that brain fog associated with even 1 or 2 drinks of alcohol. And so I'm going to go ahead and just drink non-alcoholic drinks or avoid drinking tonight altogether. And so I think that mindful drinking is not very prescriptive in the sense that this is how you drink, this is the way you should drink. All it says is you should be aware of your why. Why do you drink? And then tie that to your values and goals.
How can people start incorporating mindful drinking into their daily lives?
Sure. I think that the very first step is to think about your relationship with alcohol and, again, whether it matches those values and goals. That can be, I think, a very common tool, and a tool that people talk a lot about in sobriety and mindful drinking is journaling. I do want to make it clear that sometimes people don't like writing, like they're just not, they just don't enjoy the process of sitting. I love it, but I'm a writer. So it can be sitting down and doing, Pinterest mood boards or whatever. The way I think about it is, how have you been drinking? And how would you like to drink, right? And so kind of contrasting those two things. And if they don't match, then you have to come up for a plan with a plan for how you're going to drink in the future. And so the acronym I use that I created to address that plan is called RATE, right? It's replace, avoid, temper, and elicit help. So in terms of replacement, that could be as simple as having a non-alcoholic drink instead of a drink with alcohol when you go out. Because I think it's important that we go out and be social. Social wellness is critical to our health, even in some ways more important than whether or not we drink alcohol. And so it's important that you go out, spend time with people. So maybe just having an alternative. And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing too. You can alternate if you want. You can have one non-alcoholic drink, one drink with alcohol, one low alcohol drink, one non-alcoholic drink, right? So sometimes that's referred to as tempo drinking. It's like to kind of keep in this place where you're not getting buzzed or even annihilated. You're just kind of drinking with the flow of things, but you're also enjoying non-alcoholic or low alcoholic cocktails too. So that's replacement, and there's lots of strategies within that. Avoid is also, that you recognize that there are certain places that you're going to have triggers you're going to want to drink. Like, I don't know about you all, but going to a wedding is like a key one for me, right? Everybody's drinking a lot at a wedding, and they're passing around the champagne to toast. It's almost obligatory to drink. And so it feels, and often they don't have non-alcoholic alternatives. So it can be really hard. Now, I don't want you to skip your friends' weddings, but if it's between that or not drinking, and that not drinking could be very problematic, or drinking could be very problematic for you, then I would say skip it. But in general, avoiding places where you might be tempted to drink, especially if you're doing like a temporary month of abstinence, like a dry January or something, that might be a good time to try that. Maybe if every time you go to a bar, you have a couple of drinks, maybe it's time to create a ritual at home or go out to a restaurant instead, something like that. Then there is temper, which means just kind of lowering the amount that you drink. And that can be as simple as drinking low alcohol cocktails. Because for some of us, it's not all or nothing. We can still drink alcohol. And even though there is no amount of alcohol that's healthy for you, you can live a healthy life that incorporates alcohol. And so I think tempering is for certain people with a mindful drinking that feel comfortable with alcohol. And then an elicit help is, and again, each one of these letters, you can think of these as strategies, and then underneath are tactics. There's various tactics you can use. So under elicit help is you could use an app. There's many really great apps out there that will help you monitor the way you drink. You can work with somebody who's a friend who's on the same path as you to kind of like, let's say you're going to a bar together. Let's check in after the second drink and see how we feel. If that was our goal, if we set a goal that we're only going to have 2 drinks and leave, let's check in at that point. How do we feel? Are we, and again, I think it's really important to approach this without judgment and to make sure that, even if you mess up or you have an extra drink you didn't intend to, that doesn't derail everything. Ultimately, there's always the chance to start again and to really achieve the goal that you want.
Yeah, that's really practical advice from you, Derek. So thank you. I really like that acronym.
Me too. Derek, so when you were talking about the weddings, it definitely made me think. So Kathleen and I are like in our mid 40s, right? And so I feel like our age group, right? They drink. And now millennials are coming in drinking less, but I still feel like people in our age group, it is the culture of socializing. And so with millennials drinking less, how do you see the culture of drinking changing in the next few years?
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, my group, men who are between the ages, I think, of 45 and 65 or something like that, are drinking more than they ever have. It's in terms of recorded history with recording alcohol use, we're binge drinking more than we ever have. And so that worries me a lot. And I think, to be honest with you, I think there's a lot of reasons for it. I think it's multifactorial. It's not just one thing. But one of the main reasons is how we were taught to approach mental health. I think that's a big one. And that's why I keep bringing it up. I've said it, I don't know, 40 times in this episode already. I keep bringing it up because it's okay. It's okay if you feel that you have a problem and you need help. I think especially, unfortunately, for men who can be really feel that they should be shielded from that and that they shouldn't do therapy. I think it's really important that they recognize that it's okay, that sometimes you need a little help. But ultimately, generations below us are changing their relationship with alcohol and they're drinking less. And there's lots of reasons for that too. I think one of it is because there's been a change in the way parenting, right? Parents are maybe a little bit more, there's a little bit more disclosure, a little bit more discussion around it, which I think is really awesome. We have to talk to our kids early about alcohol use and substance use. And there's a lot more awareness of the health issues and even sometimes of the connection between parental alcohol use and their children's alcohol use. As I mentioned earlier, my dad identifies as an alcoholic, right? That was the worst siren in the history of sirens. I don't know what came out of my mouth, but okay, whatever. That's a better siren.
That's a European siren, Derek.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Kathleen. European siren. But essentially, that should be a big alarm that you may have problems with alcohol use. If your parents had problems with alcohol use, you will probably have problems with alcohol use. There's a good chance. So people are becoming more aware of that, of things like that, and also they're just generally more aware of the health issues with alcohol. In the 1980s, we all got it. It sounds like we're not too far apart in age. We all got this idea that somehow alcohol was healthy for us, right? And that if we drank a lot of wine, we'd get this magic ingredient called resveratrol that will protect us from heart disease. And obviously that's false. And it's been debunked since then. And you can get resveratrol from other sources and much better sources. You have to drink a lot of wine in the first place to get the amount you need for it to be a protective factor. So it really is just kind of debunked. And in general, when they look at all-cause mortality, I mean, alcohol is going to reduce your lifespan. That's what, and certainly reduce your health span too, which is not, when we die, but when we get older and we have problems associated that alcohol is associated with. So I think people are more aware of that. And if they're not, well, now you're listening, so you know. So that's good. And then lastly, there's this culture in which kids are under more observation than they've ever been, from each other, from their parents, from other people. I don't know if you all have kids, but my son has this watch that we can tell wherever he is. He's 9 years old, and it bums me out because I'm like, I don't want to monitor him. But at the same time, it's part of the culture. Everyone's being observed. And on social media, that's especially true. If you somebody who's young does something under the influence of alcohol, that could be caught for posterity, and that's it. That could undermine future things that they do. So anyway, I think all of that is contributing to people drinking less, and some of it for good, some of it for bad, but ultimately, overall, I think it's a good thing.
I've really enjoyed your example that you gave previously about the wedding, about how drinking is happening at weddings, and that's an environmental trigger for some people for sure. How would you address the stigma associated with not drinking alcohol at social events?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And here I am, an advocate for mindful drinking. And after a soccer game for my son, all the parents went out and they had some drinks, and I got a non-alcoholic beer. And unconsciously, I'd turn the label towards me. And I was drinking, and then I stopped and I go, oh my gosh, why did I do that? I want to tell people that I'm drinking non-alcoholic drinks. But in that case, because this group of people did not identify me as the mindful drinking person, I didn't necessarily, I guess subconsciously, I didn't really want to explain why I wasn't drinking. And nobody should have to explain why they're not drinking, right? Let's say that as a bartender, because ultimately all of this stuff I'm talking about, the health stuff, I have some grasp on, but at the end of the day, my training is in bartending, and I can tell you that as a bartender, you don't have to tell people why you don't drink. It happens all the time that people will challenge you and say, why don't you drink? Or they just say, ooh, you don't drink, you're an alcoholic, are you pregnant, etc. You don't have to tell people any of that. You're under no obligation. You can just say, I'm not drinking right now. That's just my choice. But again, some people don't feel super comfortable for that. So my suggestion is, and this is a tactic under replace, right? The R is something called propping, right? But you take a glass that looks like it would have alcohol in it, right? So for instance, a gin and tonic usually comes in a double rocks glass. You fill that with tonic or soda water and put a lime on the side. Nobody will ever know, right? So it'll be between you and the bartender. And as a bartender, I love it when people regulate their drinking. Trust me, it's the other way that I'm very uncomfortable with, right? When they're drunk and they're acting like jerks. But when somebody's just like, hey, I'm doing soda water, do you mind putting it in a double rocks glass with a lime on the side? No problem, So I think that ultimately that's one tactic that you can use. Obviously, you could bring, if you feel comfortable, especially at a wedding, this can be really awkward, but you can bring 2 bottles of non-alcoholic sparkling wines. Non-alcoholic sparkling wines are delicious. They're some of the best out there. And so give one to the couple and pop one open there yourself and just hand it to the bartender or whoever's doing that and say, hey, this is just for me because I can't drink. Will you just pour this for me when I come up? Nobody will ever know except, again, you and the bartender.
Speaking of bartenders, you really led us into our next question, which is, what has the response been from the bar and restaurant industry to your work?
Thank you. That's what it's been. And that surprised me because when I changed my relationship with alcohol, I was scared. And I don't scare easily, but I was really scared. And I was scared for a number of reasons. One was because I had to face my colleagues. But also, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. Like I thought, what is it going to do? Now do real estate or something? It wasn't like I had to turn to a totally different profession. Nothing wrong with real estate. I always bring that up as an example, and I have a feeling that there's like some real estate people out there like, oh, come on, Derek. But ultimately, when I approached my colleagues, I did so in a way that I was clenching my teeth and getting ready for the fight. And they said, wow, of course. Yeah, this makes total sense. And thank you. This is thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for doing this. We need this. And personally, there was one incident where I talked to one of my former investors in the bar. And I went to talk to him because we were closing down the bar and I had to give him some information about it. And I said, yeah, I had to change my relationship with alcohol. And he said, yeah, I knew that. I knew that. I didn't know how to address it. And I was scared for you. I was scared for your life. I saw what was happening. And I was like, wow, I didn't, for some reason, I didn't think I was under observation. I guess that's the Gen X hubris. But yeah, so ultimately people were understanding of my personal situation. People were appreciative of the advocacy for it because they think we need this in the industry. I was recently at the Bar Convent Brooklyn, which is a conference of about 5,000 people that come to New York, mostly people in the industry to talk about spirits, cocktails, bars, and so forth. And we had a seminar on non-alcoholic drinks, and it was standing room only. And in fact, I went to other seminars and they were busy, but ours is the one that I saw that was the busiest. And I'd like to believe it's because of me and my charm and my personality, but I know the reason for it is out of curiosity. People want to know because bartenders, for better or worse, we're the ones who see people in these situations. We're the ones who see people drinking too much, showing up at the bar all the time, making bad decisions. And it's often beyond us to make, we're sometimes compared with psychologists, right? But we're not psychologists. And we can't really, we don't have a lot of tools to help and change a person's life. That's up to them and their psychologists. All we can do is serve a drink or not serve a drink if we feel the person is quote unquote overserved. But often you just see people who are drinking, they're at their very worst, and it changes your perspective on alcohol really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, okay, so with the theme of bartending, what are some common misconceptions that you think that people would have about no and low alcohol cocktails?
Well, I think that there's a number of issues that why people are not adopting non-alcoholic drinks. One is availability.
Okay.
Even though there are a lot more products out there, in fact, there's been just this like meteoric growth in non-alcoholic brands. It doesn't mean that they're everywhere, and it doesn't mean that, you know, if you walk into a bar and restaurant tomorrow, they're going to automatically have delicious non-alcoholic alternatives. So availability is a problem. Although we're trying to overcome that problem, it's a problem. I think the perception of value is a problem. So people think, well, they're not very good, so but they're expensive. So they don't really understand why they cost the amount that they do. When in some cases it's more expensive to develop and make a non-alcoholic product than a product with alcohol. I think that there's the stigma around being identified as an alcoholic or somebody who doesn't drink. And then along with that comes a sort of certain embarrassment, factor. Like when I sat down and I turned the label, I was embarrassed to share aspects of it. So because I like these acronyms, I use that acronym as SAVE: stigma, availability, value, and embarrassment. So I think that that's kind of the barrier, some of the barriers we're experiencing to people adopting it. But as it becomes more normalized within the culture to drink non-alcoholic drinks, that's changing the stigma and the embarrassment factor. As the drinks are becoming better and people are actually encountering ones that they like, I think that's changing it. And obviously accessibility is just a question of time and development.
Right.
It's a new product, right? In a way, there's many non-alcoholic beverages that go back, all the way to temperance when there was another movement. That's mindful drinking 1.0, But we have this new group of sophisticated non-alcoholic beverages, beers, wines, spirits, that are just blossoming, And so that's just going to take time. And eventually it'll be normalized, they'll be everywhere, and people will find ones that they like.
Yeah, I think Kathleen knows too that I live in like a tiny town in Pennsylvania. I got invited to a cocktail party for tomorrow, and which is like my personal hell when people call it a cocktail party. And I said, "Oh, do you want me to bring anything?" He said, "Oh no, I have phony Negronis and some non-alcoholic margaritas." And I was like, "Thank you, sir." Yeah. Speaking of, could you tell us a little bit more? This is something I don't know a lot about at all, about low alcohol cocktails and how they kind of integrate with the idea of mindful drinking.
Yeah, first of all, low is not clear what that means, right? So because it's sort of uncertain, low can mean a lot of different things depending on the beverage. There is a legal definition of low alcohol beer that is about 2.5% alcohol, which is about half your beer alcohol by volume. So alcohol by volume means how much alcohol is in the whole can, the percentage of alcohol. So like if it's a beer, it's going to be somewhere between 5 and probably 10%. It can go higher, but it rarely does. It's more likely going to be around 4 or 5%. And half of that is legally defined as as low alcohol. Wine doesn't have a legal definition for what is low alcohol. Right now, they're developing low alcohol wines that are somewhere between 3 and 8% alcohol by volume. But generally, wines I would consider to be low alcohol to begin with, right? Because they don't go much higher than 16% alcohol by volume. Whereas bourbon or vodka or gin is going to be 40% alcohol by volume or more. So with that said, the way to think about cocktails, or I think about it in my book, Mindful Mixology, I took strong cocktails like the Manhattan or the Martini, which come in somewhere between 20 and 30% alcohol by volume. And I said half or less of that is what constitutes a low alcohol cocktail, right? So in that case, an Aperol Spritz would be a low alcohol cocktail. Some people will say that that's too high. So it really, again, it's kind of a difficult thing to nail down. But I think if it's less than a standard amount of alcohol in that drink, then it automatically is lower for sure. And that's enough to start with. But if somebody really wants to get into it, they have to kind of understand a little bit more about alcohol by volume and start to pay attention to it. So one thing that I recommend, because it's a lot of math, but it's not that much more complicated than counting calories. So in that way, I don't think it's super complicated, but it is an extra step. What I recommend is people familiarize themselves with their favorite drinks and what the alcohol by volume is. And then in that case, they can start to determine and set goals for what they're going to drink that night, right? If you notice, there's the V on ABV is volume. That means it also depends how much you drink. Right. So let's say that you drink one shot of vodka that is 1.5 ounces of 40% alcohol. And you have one beer that's, I think, 12 ounces at 5% alcohol, or you have one 5-ounce glass of wine that's 14% alcohol. All those are equivalent. Right. So that's something to keep in mind. The amount of liquid in there matters too. So if you have one shot of vodka that's 40% and you have 2 pitchers of beer that's 5%, I think we know which one's going to get you more drunk, and that is clearly the pitchers of beer. So there's a little bit of math behind it. There is a ABV calculator that I created online with Epicurious. So if it's on epicurious.com, or if you just Google ABV calculator, Derek Brown, you could probably find it. I created it with Maggie Hoffman, and basically you can put in almost any drink, and if you know the recipe, and you can determine what the ABV is. So I think that's important. There are other websites like responsibility.org where you can determine whether something is a standard drink, which means that unit that we use in the United States to determine how many drinks we should have, right? They say 1 standard drink or 2 standard drinks, depending on what sex you're assigned at birth, right? So responsibility.org is a great place to check that.
I was wondering, Derek, can you talk a little bit more about your book, Mindful Mixology, and what can readers expect from it?
So it's primarily a recipe book, and they have no and low alcohol cocktails. There's 60 altogether, and a lot of the low alcohol ones can be made non-alcoholic as well. So I'll give instructions how you can make them non-alcoholic. In it, I also talk about the theory of how to build non-alcoholic cocktails. So what makes something a non-alcoholic cocktail? Like, obviously, iced tea is not a non-alcoholic cocktail, right? Lemonade is not a non-alcoholic cocktail. So what is that dividing line? What makes it a non-alcoholic cocktail? And, I define that a little bit. I define that as it has intensity of flavor. When you drink a cocktail, it's a cocktail, right? That's kind of a punch. When you the piquancy or that bite that you get, sometimes from alcohol, sometimes from other ingredients like ginger, there's a certain length or volume that's not taken up by juice or sugar, and there's a certain texture, that weight, the mouthfeel that comes with a cocktail. So that's sort of the sensory way to define a cocktail, right? Those are the sensory characteristics that define any cocktail, whether it has alcohol or not. And so in the book, I talk about those categories and what kind of ingredients you can use. And sometimes it's just stuff you can get at a grocery store. What kind of ingredients you can use to create an adult, sophisticated, non-alcoholic drink, aka a non-alcoholic cocktail.
So what are some of the ingredients that we should stock? I know you don't have to go through all of them that are in your book, but what are some of the ingredients we should stock for our no or low alcoholic cocktail bar at home?
Well, look, there's plenty of 3-hour podcasts nowadays, so if you want, we can go through everything. But I will.
But give us a few, just like 2 or 3.
Yeah, you got it. No, I have one drink in particular that I think really highlights it, and it's called the Pinch Hitter. Okay. And for me, it's kind of like the prototypical non-alcoholic sour. And it starts with lemonade. So you use fresh lemon juice, and use ginger syrup. Instead of sugar syrup or just sugar, you use ginger syrup, which is really easy to make. You essentially just chop up ginger, heat it with sugar and water, and that's it. And there's a recipe in my book, and you can find it online, and I'm happy to provide it to you all as well. So lemon and ginger syrup. So the ginger gives it a little bit of that intensity of flavor and piquancy. I also add to it aquafaba, which is a fancy way of saying chickpea water. Mm-hmm. Okay? The chickpea water is a substitute for egg whites. So not everybody can have egg whites. Actually, not everybody can have chickpeas, but more people can have chickpeas. So I use aquafaba. You could use egg whites as well. This is a thickening agent. It also gives it that nice foaminess on the top of it. And so that helps with the texture. And then I add salt tincture, just a very small amount, which again is just a really simple ingredient that sounds complicated. It's 4 parts water to 1 part salt. Then you just shake it until the crystals dissolve. And it doesn't add saltiness to the drink. What it does is it suppresses some of the bitterness and makes it appear to be more round and sweet. So salt in small doses actually increases the kind of texture and the flavor. So that's a kind of interesting little trick, and you see a lot more bartenders using that in cocktails with and without alcohol. I also add to it apple cider vinegar, just a spoonful, which is a byproduct of alcohol. It does not have any alcohol in it, but it is from alcohol. And so it has some of that funky, intense flavor to it. And so by the time you add all of that together, shake it up with ice, you get this really fluffy drink that has a little bit of burn, a little bit of piquancy, a lot of intensity of flavor. And all of those ingredients, even though they have fancy names behind them, like, the tincture and so forth, ultimately you could buy those for, a couple dollars at tops at a grocery store. So I created that drink specifically because I wanted to show people how easy it is in some ways to create a non-alcoholic cocktail, an adult sophisticated drink.
It sounds delicious. I want one right now. I don't know how my clients would feel if it looked like I was like drinking a cocktail through their sessions, but I definitely feel like I want one. What are some of your favorite, it sounds like that might be one of them, but what are some of your favorite no and low alcohol cocktails that we can make at home, like in addition to it's called the pinch hitter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the easiest things to do is to buy RTD cocktails, ready to drink cocktails, right?
Okay.
So I will, I'm happy to share recipes and that sort of thing, but if you are sitting there thinking, oh my God, what was this guy talking about? It's easy to make. I don't know how to make any of the stuff he talked about. Go get a can of cocktails. They're much better than they used to be, right?
Yeah.
Like they even, in many cases, will use natural ingredients. There's one I tasted recently from Aplos, A-P-L-O-S, called an Ume Spritz. The cocktail was designed by Lynette Marrero, who's one of the top bartenders in the world. And it tastes so good. She did a great job. It does have some functional ingredients in it. It has hemp in it. So for some people, they may choose to avoid that. But in this case, the hemp doesn't cause, I think, it doesn't necessarily give you that buzz that alcohol does, for sure. And so that is an example. There's a producer called Mocktail Club that you can find. I can find it. We have a grocery store in DC called Giant. Safeway, those are throughout the U.S., but not everywhere. So you can go to your grocery store in some cases and find these non-alcoholic ready-to-drink cocktails. I think that's a really easy lift. But if you want to find ones that are easy to make, they're non-alcoholic, what I'd suggest is getting non-alcoholic spirits, right?
Okay.
Like replacements. Like there's a non-alcoholic tequila substitute, which is from Jalisco in Mexico, called Almave, A-L-M-A-V-E. And it's a really great product. You can make a margarita with it, and you have to do very little to change the recipe. All right, so that's an example. You don't have to do much. Just use the recipe you have, just switch out this one ingredient. If you want to make it low alcohol, there's also an easy answer to that. Make it half the tequila and half the Almave. And that way you have automatically dropped the alcohol by half, which is fantastic. So those are really easy ways to do this without having to know everything I know. But one of the best ways that you can do this is for $39.95. Buy Mindful Mixology, a comprehensive guide to no and low alcohol cocktails. Once you read it, you will be an expert.
Absolutely. I think Sonia and I are going to be making some of these non-alcoholic cocktails very soon.
Yeah, we definitely will. Derek, can you tell us a little bit about Positive Damage and any other upcoming projects that you're excited about?
Absolutely. Yeah. Positive Damage is my company that does consulting, classes, and content around mindful drinking, no and low alcohol cocktails, and social wellness. And I do a lot of different stuff, from consulting with hotels, bars, restaurants, to working with brands that are non-alcoholic, to writing. I have a Substack called Positive Damage, where I'd love everybody who's listening to this to sign up for it. I put out articles, a couple articles a month on all of those topics. I have a podcast myself called the Mindful Drinking Podcast on the National Academy of Sports Medicine, NASM podcast network, where actually, Kathleen, you'll be excited to know I recently interviewed Stephen C. Hayes. So
Stop.
you got to listen to it. I got to tell you, it was fantastic. I mean,
Oh
what
my
a great
gosh.
I had Rosamund Dean recently, who was a person who coined the term mindful drinking. As much as I put some mileage on it, she's the one who deserves the credit. Then I interviewed a neuroscience psychiatrist about alcohol and sleep. So there's various people that I talked to about it, different facets of mindful drinking and no and low alcohol cocktails. And I am a co-founder of the Mindful Drinking Fest, which happens every year in January, which is an opportunity for people to come and try all these products. We had 150 products at the last one. There's 100% you're going to leave with at least one drink that you really love. And we have parties around it. We have seminars around mindful drinking and wellness classes and all of that. So it's a really great time. It's in Washington, D.C. Look out for that.
Amazing. I might have to make the trip down from Toronto.
Please.
It's amazing. Yeah. So thank you so much, Derek, for being with us today. And we know that our listeners are definitely going to appreciate all the information and inspiration that you gave. So thank you so, so much for joining us.